asking for permission, so you can give us your permission. That'd be wonderful. The idea for this conversation, we've got about an hour, a little bit less than an hour with Jose, and we were very excited to have this conversation to kick off the year. We couldn't think of a better way to get started for 2022. So thank you, Jose, for joining us for this conversation. Before we jump in, I'll just kind of do a quick housekeeping on the format. We'll basically have a fireside chat format for this conversation. So we have a few questions we've kind of brainstormed ahead of time. Gail and I will kind of start off that conversation. We'll ask a few questions, but we do want this to be time for you all to ask questions that you have. So please feel free to type it in the chat, or we'll have some time after the first 30 minutes or so that you can just join in and ask questions with Jose. So really excited for this conversation. Before we start with the questions, I'd love to kind of do a quick introduction to Jose and some of the work that he's doing. So I'll do a quick read. Jose Aguilar Contreras, apologies for the pronunciation there, is the founder of Racismo MX, a nonprofit-based organization in Mexico tackling racism. He holds a BS in economics from the Mexican Autonomous Institute of Technology and an MBA from the University of Essex in the United Kingdom. At a young age, he discovered the power of communication and social transformation, inspiring him to launch the first mainstream LGBTQ plus magazine in Mexico in 2007. This helped to both make visible the LGBTQ plus movement in the media and gave a platform for the human rights agenda that led to same-sex marriage laws in 2010. Prior to Racismo MX, he was head of digital content for the Public Education Office. And in 2018, he founded Racismo MX to create educational tools for young people, generate data about systemic oppression, and start a public conversation about racism in Mexico. And today, most of our conversation will be kind of along the lines of the work that Jose is doing at Racismo MX. So with that, thank you once again for joining us. I'm going to pass it to Gail to kind of kickstart this conversation. Thank you once again, Jose, for joining us. Gail, on to you.
Oh my gosh, wow. So much wonderful information. And I'm so grateful I have a big cup of coffee because I have to try to keep up. Oh my goodness. Yes, I love the coffee. Welcome everybody. It's always so great to see these convenings happen. And thank you, Jose, again, for being here. I just wanted to start off because I'm so interested in origins and origin story and how things start, right? And at Little Big Fund, we always try to think about, okay, what's the little steps we can take, or what are the little steps we have taken that we want to remember? So when you talk about how at a young age you discovered the power of social transformation and storytelling, what is that very or original story? Like, what sparked you? What ignited you at a young age, which I'm assuming was just the other day?
Thank you, Gail, and thank you, Abhinav, for the invitation. And thank you all for being here and listening. And yes, when I was very young, I always liked all the things related to communications. For example, I remember when I was in high school, all my projects, be it from science or humanities, I always made something about communications. For example, I proposed magazines or radio shows. I always liked that. However, I didn't go for a bachelor degree on communications. On the other side, I went to the economics areas because I loved mathematics as well. I love humanities, reading about sociology. So I really enjoyed studying economics, but always when I was studying, I was thinking, how can we communicate this? Economics, as you all know, it's not a very easy area that everyone understands. Even today, when we read newspapers, it's sometimes hard to understand the economic data and scenarios, etc. So I always thought about how to communicate the things better, right? So when I started my career, just after I graduated, I started working for the Ministry of Finance, but I wasn't very happy because that was a work that no one knows about. and it was like very private, and I wasn't enjoying that work. So I was thinking about how to communicate something that I was living. So the power of communication and storytelling just joined my need for expressing myself and the things that I was living. So I came out as a gay man in 2001. So it was in 2003 that I started thinking about how to communicate things better. Because as you all know, back in 2001, 2003, you know, the LGBTQ issues in Mexico were a taboo, you know. There was a lot of cliches, a lot of unconscious biases. And so I decided, no, I have to communicate who we really are, and make other people, other LGBTQ young people, to be inspired and to know that there's many ways to be happy and to be accepted, and let the Mexican society to know how the LGBTQ community have contributed to the development of society, basically. So that's like the spark or the beginning of my career.
For sure. And sorry, Gail, go for it. I think you were going to ask a follow-up.
No, I was just going to say thank you. And I can see when I hear a story like that, I can see that you kind of kept coming back to a heart, right? What was making you happy? What were you feeling was authentic to you? And we, you know, I just think that that's an important theme throughout our lives, is what is it that's bringing me joy that then I can then recreate out there or explain. So it feels like you do a lot of personal calibration along the way of creating your mission, which I think is very important.
Thank you. Yes.
For sure. And that was quite interesting when we were kind of learning a little bit more about some of the work that you're currently doing. And so I wanted to ask a little bit more about this kind of origin story for Racismo MX. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but how did that transition happen? And when 2017, I believe, is when the organization was kind of getting started, 2017, 18, how did that conversation spark? And for a lot of people, and for a lot of us here, racism in Mexico, that's a new thing. It's something I haven't read as much about. And so that requires a lot of educating, a lot of that data collection that you talk about. And so talk to a little bit more about how you got started, and then also some of the things of what you actually do in Mexico right now.
Okay, that's a great question. And I think two things like collapsed and make the magic happen. Even today, I am very surprised of how things went through, you know, or happened, because I was like, you know, I never expected this to happen. What is the context? I want you to know a little bit of the context, because when we think about Mexico, we think about a concept of a country, and you don't often think about racism in Mexico. You think about racism against Mexicans in the US or in other parts of the world, but very, very few times you think about racism inside Mexico. But let me tell you something. Well, Mexico, it's a racist country. Mexico, it's a country that was colonized by Europeans, mainly Spanish people. And during the colonial times, a certain kind of society configurated, where typically white people with European origins stayed at the top, and the majority of the people, mainly indigenous people or Afro-descendant people, stay like in the lowest parts of the society. This didn't change when Mexico got its independence. Of course, it was a big transformation, but the thing is that the elite stay mainly white and mainly with European thinking or ways of being, right? That it is okay. The thing is that they imposed that colonial point of view to the majority of the country that was already very diverse, because when we think about indigenous people, they're not one type of indigenous people. Mayans are very different from Zapotecs. Zapotecs are very different from Purépechas. There are many different kind of ethnicities around Mexico, and that created, of course, a lot of inequality, because back in the 19th century, most of the country were indigenous, most of the country were Afro descendants, very few people speak Spanish. So that created a lot of inequality because education was in Spanish, health system that was very new was in Spanish, and the access to justice was in Spanish. So that created, that cracked the society, the Mexican society. But that hasn't changed. Nowadays, we still see that in Mexico. If you come here to Mexico and you go to see the people in power, the business people, or you go to the wealthy areas, you will exclusively see white people. But if you go to the less privileged areas, you will see the majority of the people are racialized. That doesn't mean that all the people in Mexico that are poor are brown skin or indigenous, or that doesn't mean that there cannot be racialized people that can be wealthy. Of course, there are certain cases, no? Because Mexico has had certain kind of mobility. But the second thing interesting about this story is that in Mexico, we believe that we are all mestizos, no? We are one race, and that race is the mixed race. A certain kind of combination between the Spanish and the indigenous. But that recent studies says that that is kind of a myth, a foundational myth, and it doesn't support itself with data that we nowadays have, and all the studies that it's around mestizaje exist right now. Why? Because first of all, mestizaje already believes in the existence of races. That we nowadays know races, human races do not exist. Sorry. So first of all, there cannot be a mestizo race. First, second, this idea of the mix between Spanish and indigenous excludes all the African people that came to Mexico during the colonial ages. Recent studies says that more people from Africa arrived to Mexico than from Europe. And even like in a ratio of 20-1, imagine that. So Mexico is a highly African country, no? And if there was a mix between populations, it was not between the Spanish and the indigenous. It was among the Africans and the indigenous. Why? Because African people arrived to Mexico as slaves, and the only way they had to find their freedom was to mix with the indigenous. That's why in Mexico, we have most of the people in Mexico have dark skin. No? But that's erased from the official story. If you go to school, to public school, or even private schools, you would never hear this story. So why? Because mestizaje or the mixed race basically is a dynamic of whitening. If you want to be mestizo, if you want to be mixed race, no, as this concept of Mexican is, you need to speak Spanish, you need to be Catholic, you need to believe in capitalism, and you need to believe in democratic values. That I'm not saying it's wrong by itself. The thing is that Mexico is more diverse than that. It was more diverse than that. And mestizaje was this idea that if you want to be Mexican, you need to be mestizo, therefore you need to whiten yourself. Leave your traditions behind, leave your language behind. You have to whiten. So that's why in Mexico, we have a lot of brown people that believe they are like kind of European. And that creates a lot of racist practices. Because if you speak an indigenous language, or if you identify yourself as Afro-Mexican, for example, you are more likely to live discrimination in the Mexican society. But just to answer your question, what happened? What ignited this conversation in Mexico? Well, back in 2010, in the University of Princeton, there was a very interesting project. The project was called the Project of Race and Ethnicity in Latin America. And this project recognized that in Latin America, race was erased by the governments. Not just Mexico, all the countries in Latin America did that. They erased the race and they said, we have no races, we are all equal, so nobody can complain about racism, right? But they say, we have kind of a pigmentocratic society, where the wealthy people are white and the poorer people are racialized. We need to measure that. So PERLA, which is the acronym for Project of Race and Ethnicity in Latin America, apply certain surveys. And this service was so successful that Mexico, adopted one. And in 2015, they published the results. And the results are exactly what I just told you. No, Mexico, it's a very pigmentocratic society where racialized people have less access to education, health, justice, and less qualified jobs, for example, and a lot of racist practices when you are in human resources departments, for example, and the selection of candidates. And for example, the selection of public officers also have this. The media, of course, is very racist. If you come to Mexico, you will exclusively see white people in the media, in advertising. So when those results were published, very few things happened. The media wasn't very interested. But there was a course in the National Autonomous University in Mexico that I saw, and I said, I want to learn more, because of course I saw that in my life. When I came out as a gay man, I didn't stop having, discrimination in my life, but I wasn't very sure if that discrimination that happened to me was homophobic, or were racist. But when I started living racist episodes in my life inside the LGBT community, something, like a red flag just sparked on me. And I said, like, this is transversal, this happens everywhere. And this is like, even with a different dynamic. I'm not saying that the homophobic or transphobic discrimination is less important, but it happens in different things. And that the thing that I was living was racism more even than homophobia. So I said, I want to study this. So I started studying. And of course, what I said to Gail at the beginning, I was like, wow, this should be known by everyone. How can Mexican society doesn't know this? And we live in this mestizo dream that we are all equal, when we are in the practice, we are not. So I opened social media, I opened my webpage, and the first idea that I had, that I am still working on it, is that I have to make a documentary of that, a visual document. Of course, I'm dreaming of having this documentary on Netflix or in Amazon, for everyone to know. And fortunately, I'm working on this right now. I've been very fortunate to have a lot of support making the documentary. But I said, like, I need to do this. But in the meantime, I cannot wait for the Mexican society to know this. So I started to making like a digital strategy, and I started posting on social media and making content for the digital space. So it was a success. I never expected this, because I said, like, no, Mexican people will reject this. Some part of the Mexican society rejected this, but most of the people identified with that and say, I've been discriminated for my skin color. I've been discriminated for my ethnic origin. So I need to know how to cope with this, or how to ask the government to stop this. So the project grew, and finally in 2020, well, that 2020 was a special year for this, all the things related to racism due to the killing of George Floyd. So that wave of talking about racism arrived to Mexico, and the only organization of the society that was doing this job was ourselves, was Racismo MX. So we received a lot of support, and finally we became a non-profit organization. And currently we have different projects regarding media, but also regarding investigation and data generation, and also education. So I finished this part saying that I never expected this, because there was a lot of external variables that helped the project to grow. But also, I think that I trusted my own experience and the things that I was living, or I lived since I was young. I identified them as racism, and I said, I need to speak about what I am living, and I'm going to use the power of communication to, to identify with other people, to relate with other people and generate empathy. So I think that's a little bit what happened, but I'm still figuring out this.
Thank you so much for that answer. Just that kind of the piece that really stands out for me is kind of going with this flow of your lived experience and letting that kind of guide a lot of what you're doing is a really beautiful way to look at it. Sometimes we're always trying to do more things and looking for how can we make the world a better place, or how can we more contribute to the society. And a lot of the times kind of going within yourself and going a bit deeper can uncover some of the trauma or the challenges that one has faced in their youth or their childhood, and that can really be informative for sure. So thank you for that answer. Gail, I'm going to pass it to you.
Yes, wonderful, wonderful answer. And the next part I'm curious about is, in situations and in countries such as what you've described for you in Mexico, where there is control over the press, or there's control over, freedom of expression and freedom of speech, right? And there's some people here who are living that every day in their villages, in their country, right? Where it's not even safe to have a conversation, right? About something that's as important as social justice, right? Or healthcare, or clean water, or right? So what kind of advice or suggestions do you have for balancing the overarching oppression that can exist, and then the internal fear that's then juxtaposed with this internal courage, right?
Yes.
To what are some skills aside from making a documentary, which is a wonderful idea, for some of us who, every day are kind of walking this fine line, right?
Oh, that's a hard question, because I think every day I have to reconfigure that answer, right? Because of course, sometimes there are days that I wake up with more fear, other days I'm more fearless. But I think that we don't need to focus on fear. Fear should not be our compass to do things. However, I believe that we need to take care of ourselves. That's different. We should not be fearful, but we have to take care of ourselves. And those, you need to think about that, because fear is never the answer. I have coped with fear. At the beginning, I was the only one who was talking about racism in Mexico, and of course I received a lot of support, but also I received threats, or saying things that for example, they say that I worked for the dark side, or sometimes they say that the government is paying me to split society, because of course racism generates controversy. Talking about privileges, it's uncomfortable. But I think sometimes I wake up in the morning and I said, I'm not going to focus on that, on those comments, and I'm going to think about the society that I want. I don't want a separated society. I want a unified society. But in order to have a unified society, we need to start looking at our problems and how to cope with them. And that's necessary. And it may be painful sometimes, but we need to do that in order to heal. I believe in racial healing, but that road is not short, it's long, and it depends on the context. I know in the US, it's a different context, and it's a different path. Or in Europe, for example, it's also very different. But in Mexico, we have a lot of variables that can help us. We are not a society that, I mean, we come from an assimilationist, I don't know how to say that, integrationist perspective, and that may be helpful. It hasn't worked, but it may be helpful. So I think we don't have to be fearful. We need to take care of ourselves.
For sure. And just kind of a follow up on that, what are some ways, and I think a lot of us here, we've talked, especially in December last year, we were talking a lot about burnout and that sense of not being able to take care of yourself, because it almost feels like you're constantly on the edge, in the sector that we're all in. Time is of the essence. It always feels like time is of the essence. And if we don't work fast enough, then people's lives and so many different things are at risk. How do you take care of yourself? What are some strategies that has worked well for you in the last couple of years?
That's a very good question, because I don't have an answer for that, because maybe I'm working on that. I I was appointed fellow of the Echoing Green organization last year, and I've been talking to other fellows that also run nonprofit organizations around the world, and the constant, of the people that work for the civil society is that we tend to not take care of ourselves, and that's bad. No, we all know that. However, it's not very clear how to do that. Let me tell you like an experience or anecdote that can illustrate a little bit. We were having this conversation at the Echoing Green fellowship with other fellows and with alumni fellows. And there was two women from a nonprofit in Germany. So we were asking to them, how can you take care of yourselves? And they say like, okay, well, what we do is that we take, every year we take a month off, and we go to the mountains, and we, disconnect from the internet. And we do that because we know, and we do yoga, and we do hiking. And but then when we went to the breakout rooms, there was a woman from Texas, and she does work for people affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. So she said like, well, that is privilege, at its best. I cannot do that. I cannot go out a month, disconnect from the world, and do yoga, because my work, is focused on people affected by the COVID-19 that it's on, going right now. So how can we do? No, I think that it's a trade-off of every day that we need to wake up and say, I need to take care of myself today. So I need to start earlier to stop earlier, or the other way around, or having my proper meal time, sleep well, try to do that every day, because we are so passionate about our works, about our jobs, that we tend to give more and more and more and more. But remember this, and that was I learned this from my boyfriend, who was a long time, he was a steward in Aeromexico, which is a Mexican airline. And there is a thing when the oxygen goes out of the cabin, there are masks that come out, and the indication is that you have to put your mask first before you help others, because if you don't help yourself, you cannot help others. So I think that's a little bit of the concept that I try to take into account every day. Like, I need to help myself first in order to help others, and that has helped me a little bit too. For example, this year my goal is to really don't open the computer on the weekends. I try to do that. In this first weekend I did that, so I'm going very well with my with my goals.
That's awesome. That is an important one. The one thing that I'm trying really hard is to put my phone away from where I sleep. Is something that I'm really trying hard. I'm not gonna lie, I haven't succeeded. It's 12 days in the year, every single day I've had it's one of those things that I think does need that discipline. But thank you so much for sharing that, and for all of the stories that you've shared so far. We promise to only take a little bit of time asking questions and then open up for the group to ask questions. I have one more question, Gail. I don't know if you have one other question you want to ask, but I wanted to ask, you mentioned a little bit about Echoing Green. Some folks here might be familiar with it. For some, this might be a new kind of program, but I believe a lot of the members of this community might be people that eventually at some point down the road might want to explore. So would love to hear a little bit more about the fellowship itself and your experience with it. I believe you're a fellow from 2021, so would love to kind of hear how that experience has been, and then maybe just a quick summary of what the fellowship actually entails as well.
Yes, well, Echoing Green entails, having people that mentors you that helps you grow your organization, because we are all in the first stage of our organizations, and they give you resources, not only educational resources which they give you, but also resources or opportunities to apply to other funds. They want you to have sustainability in time, and they acknowledge that most of the times these organizations, since they are non-profit, they need to have ongoing funding, right? So they know that, and so they want you to guarantee your work are very well done in order to get the funds you need. And that that help or that support has been very, very important for me, because right now I'm applying for other funds, and my mentor, which he is based in Uganda, and he has a lot of experience getting funds. So he has, give me very, very good advices throughout this journey. But also the fellowship implies a grant, which currently I am using, and we all use it in different ways. But for example, in my case, that I didn't have a fixed salary every month, so I use it a little bit to pay for my work, and certain utilities and expenses that the organization have, which makes the road very, very more easier. It makes the road like more inspiring, because now I feel like I'm secure for a time. I can get more funds, and the team, which is the most important thing for me, are like kind of more focused on their work than on the economic need. Also, it gives you access to other people. For example, now that I'm talking about the documentary, they said like, who would you like to know, who would you like to meet? And I was saying like, well, I would like to meet someone from Netflix, for example, and they are working on that. And well, how can you apply? Well, you just have to go to the webpage and answer the questions. For example, in my experience, and this is, I know this sounds cliche, but believe me, this is very, very true. When I started doing the application, I was being very true. I even thought at certain times when I was filling the application, I was thinking, I will certainly I will not be selected, because I am being myself, and probably my persona is not fit for that. So, but what the heck? I will do that. I will be myself. If I don't like them, well, I'm not for them. They're not for me. And that genuinity, I think that was led me to win the fellowship. So in all that you do, feel free to be yourselves, because you are perfect, because you are okay. You just need to find the right fit, and not everything will fit for you, and that's a fact. But there are many other things that will be a perfect fit for you. You just need to be genuine, and I think that's my experience.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I collected the link real quick for anyone that's curious to learn more about the fellowship program here as well. Gail, did you have one more question before we open up to the group here?
No. I mean, of course, I could ask a whole bunch of questions, but I want to make space for all of these other lovely people here on the screen. Thank you.
For sure. Feel free to just unmute yourselves if you have a question. I know there's a raise your hand button, so we can try that. We're a small enough group. So yeah, and anyone questions for Jose?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Joe.
Hi, good morning, Jose. Such an inspirational story. We also serve LGBTQ in our organization, only 4% of them. But everything about the LGBTQ community was perfectly clear. I remember in the beginning, I agree with most of the articles that I read. And years later, I think it was in 2016, maybe 2017, something happened where it's the meaning of the purpose was watered down. Every couple of weeks there's a new terminology, And I don't know how or where the terminology is being constructed. Jose, I am having difficulties to adapt. What advice can you give us on how to adapt to the terminology of the LGBTQ community?
Well, that's a very good question, especially because Racismo MX, we fight against racism, but always with an intersectional approach. What is intersectionality? Well, probably you all know that, or maybe no. I'm gonna just give a quick definition. It's an analytical tool, no, that help us to know the context of the people, to give better answers to their needs. Could be in the public policy arena, or in the judiciary system arena, or in certain other areas. But we need to understand the context of the people better in order to give better solutions to the problems. So intersectionality, for example, could be like, it's not the same experience that a white woman has, that of course a white woman, of course, has experiences with I don't know how to say that in English, but it's patriarchy or the gender violence, for example, that because she is a woman. But it's not the same experience that a Black trans woman, an immigrant, can have. They are both women, but they have different experiences due to other oppressions that they can live. So intersectionality helps us to analyze that. And why am I saying all this? To answer your question, I think that we need to understand those things that are happening within the LGBT community, or within the feminist movement, or within the anti-racist movement, in order to know their needs. For example, in the LGBT community, the inclusive language can be a challenge for many people, but you need to understand the motivations that the LGBT community has, not yours. Because sometimes when we are outside the movement or the oppressed population, historically discriminated population, we tend to invalidate a little bit their things, or society tend to think that it's a fashion, no, or it's something that it's temporary. But we are not judges. We are just helping people, and we need to understand what they need, Otherwise, we would be imposing them a solution that we think it's okay for them. So in that dynamic, it's the same thing. If you think that there are new concepts that you may not understand, for example, maybe you are referring to non-binary, the non-binary people, no, or the pronouns that they may have, like they, them. It's all right. You don't need to be a judge. You don't need to say, should I adapt or not? You just need to know that's a need of the LGBT community. So I need to help them find their own solutions. I think that's a little bit the mindset that you need to have in order to be a better, to give better solutions, I think.
Thank you for that answer, Jose. And how would you distinguish between racism and personal hatred?
Well, I think that racism is it's a system. It goes beyond an episode of discrimination and goes beyond an episode of hate. Of course, we unfortunately, our societies, we can encounter hate and discrimination just around the corner, and not just because of your race or the color of your skin or your national origin. You can find hate based on everything, unfortunately. But that doesn't mean that there is a system, a historical system that operates like the patriarchy or like racism or like homophobia that have many years working. No, so I think that's a little bit the difference.
Thank you so much, Jose. I appreciate you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Brianna, who just had to jump off, just said thank you for sharing, and so we just wanted to kind of share that as well. Any more questions? We have about 15 minutes left, so we'll probably be able to do 2 to 3 more questions. So if anyone has any other question, feel free to unmute yourself and ask away. Rogers, go for it.
Thanks so much. Sorry for joining late. Maybe just a brief introduction about me to José. My name is Roger Sumolo. I'm based in Kenya. I run a youth-led organization. We work with young people living with HIV and disability. And some part of our team are also the LGBTI community. I want to have much to ask because I've just joined, but I really appreciate what you are doing. For the little that I've gathered, you're doing a lot, and maybe we'll engage further and get to understand each other more. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Rogers. Now that you're saying that you're in Kenya and that you work for the LGBT community, one of the fellows of the Echoing Green Fellows works in Kenya for the LGBT community. So I will gladly put you in contact with him. I will give Abhinav his contact, so you can find something in common to work together.
For sure, happy to forward that as well. Gail, sorry, I saw you.
I was just going to say thank you. That's wonderful. Yeah. I was going to ask a question about fundraising and asking for money. And I know that, you know, the Echoing Green is a big lift for you in that regard. But what are some of the ways that you have found that you balance telling story, right, and context, and then asking for funds and fundraising? How does that play into your you know, your process?
That's very interesting question. I have thought about it. However, I have never put it in words because no one had asked me that. You know, lately I've been working on that, and I have discovered that asking for funds, it's a more scientific thing than anything else. You know, it's very cold, because big foundations, like for example, nowadays we are funded by two big foundations. One of them is the Ford Foundation, and the other one is Hispanics in Philanthropy, and they are funding several projects. And the approach is very scientific. It's like, okay, these are my projects. What are your incentives? What are you looking for? And let's see if we have a fit. Sometimes the projects can be adapted for the needs of the foundation, or the other way around. The foundation discovers in you, because of course they don't know everything. So they need the nonprofits to know what's going on. So the more they know about you, the more they can be convinced that your project will function. So I think it's like, again, being genuine, being you, and also being open to do a little changes. Of course, not a radical change. No, it's not like, please do whatever the foundation wants. No, it's not like that. But of course, you can be flexible in order to get the funds, because reality is not that squared. You know, you can have flexibility, not just in this, in everything. So recently, I've been talking to the Open Foundation Society, and the approach has been like that. Has been very scientific. What are you looking for? What do you have? What do you believe in? What do you want to accomplish? And that has been very fruitful. We have not closed any deals yet, but everything is going very positive. So my advice would be like that. Approach it in a very scientific way. It doesn't matter if you are, for example, I thought that, no, it's like, oh my God, I'm Jose, you know, I'm very well known in the social sphere, in the social media, you know, I'm an Echoing Green Fellow. They don't care about that. They care about your projects and the sustainability of them and the positive impact. So look at it that way.
Very helpful, thanks.
Yeah,
Sure.
like to ask Jose.
Joseph, I saw you. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, thanks. Quick question. Yeah, so the topic of racism in Mexico, you know, Latin America, is a critical issue. You know, it's been hitting another rock, but that whole area, Latin America, Caribbean, has that colonial legacy, and you know, some of the issues tend to mirror the same places. You know, those with ancestry from Europe on top, and Native populations and Afro-descendant populations at the bottom. And at the heart of it is Jose's background, economics. So when you begin to talk about acknowledging racism and that there's different ethnic groups, it's kind of a threat to the economic system, you know. So, but it starts with the education that Jose's organization is doing. And I think Gail was saying, I think what Gail was hinting at is maybe that economic component to it, you know, what comes after the education, because when people become more aware, they want to demand more to stop the discrimination. We want access to education. We want more representation in media, and that's a threat to the social status. So it's, you know, it's critical, but it's very, very, very real. So I was wondering a couple of questions for Jose. What kind of, I know it's going to meet me up with resistance, but what kind of support is your organization and your work getting from people, everyday people, and also from maybe government and other social organizations? Do you partner with other social organizations? That's the first question in terms of support, because we know the resistance is going to be there to whatever extent. And the second one is advice for us, echoing green. Because I saw your picture on the website, because I was part of like a Clinton Global Initiative, and somebody, you know, wanted me to deal with the echoing green. I didn't apply last spring. I did kind of apply this fall, but you know, it was just because they were pushing me to apply. And I don't expect, like, I really should have applied with somebody else, because I know some people apply somebody else, but it was this fellow I saw online. He just got out of jail. He was released from prison. It became an inspiration to me, you know. So I ended up applying, but it's really applying just to know the process to work on my application, and when to reapply for maybe this year or the following year, 2023. So I was wondering if Jose is available for advice and coaching after this conversation, that, you know,
of course,
experiences, you know, that type of stuff.
Well, I'm going to start with the second part of the question, or the second question. Of course, please, Abhinav, if you can share my contact with Joseph, that would be very good. And of course, I can mentor you. And that's the difference between the Echoing Green grant and the other grants. While the other grants focus on your project or your organization, the Echoing Green Fellow focuses on you. And that's, I mean, when I heard that, I was like, is this really that way? But they are very, very, they take care of you. They even have like an hotline. If you feel bad, if you want to talk, you can have it 24/7. That's like, I have never seen that in my life. And that's why you need to be very genuine in your application, because they care about you. So that's good. And regarding the first question about the support, and I agree with you 100%. Tackling racism implies a structural change, and you need to change the structures, including the economic ones, because racism implies that certain people has power, you know, due to the heritage, mainly colonial heritage, and some other people lack the power, no, and the access to certain basic rights. So we need to be very careful. I started this movement by myself, but nowadays there are other voices that join me, and they have their own projects, and that we share information. And what we say is that we need to take care of the anti-racist movement to avoid certain other the private sector or the government to you know, co-opt or to kidnap the narrative and the movement. Because for example, some companies have approached to our organization and asked us for help in the diversity and inclusion area, and we do that, but we do that very carefully, because we always say, you don't have to do this for marketing purposes. You need to do this because you really need to you really want to have a structural change where everyone can be in your board of directors, anyone can be in a C-level, for example, and not just the people of the same people of always. So we need to be very careful, as well as with the government. This government in Mexico, they say, or they claim they are left-wing, and they come, most of them come from the left-wing tradition, and they have put the topic of racism very openly. No, they talk about racism very openly. That has been positive, but at the same time, they replicate racism in their operations every day. For example, they want to build a big train in the Yucatan Peninsula and for touristic purposes, and they don't care about the indigenous communities there, and they want to put it. So in my point of view, that's a racist practice, because you are not asking them first what they want or what they need, or even, like making reparations, for example. So we need to be very careful to separate representation and narrative from the real practice. So that's something that I do every day. I try to, cope with both, because otherwise anti-racism will become like the new marketing tool for companies and governments.
Great.
Thank you for sharing that. And wonderful questions. Thank you, Joseph, for the questions. Thanks everyone for the questions. I know we have a couple of minutes. Just on that last point, something that I was reminded of a couple of months ago, I had a conversation with someone who was, he was part of the apartheid movement, the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, and had actually worked on it. And I had the opportunity to ask him a question along the lines, and he said something that was really powerful. He said, do not ever conflate access with influence. And a lot of the times, especially with companies or even with government, there is access, there is opportunity to show that there is support or representation. But as you exactly said, influence is not, that doesn't always translate to influence. And that, I think, being aware of that is quite crucial. So that's just something that I wanted to kind of add to that. We're in the last few minutes. Jose, it's been such an honor to have you here. Any final words from you before we wrap up for today? We'll kind of have you do a couple of closing words, and then we'll wrap up for today.
Well, I want to tell you all, I mean, I wrote down all your projects while you were writing them, and you are all doing an amazing work. For example, from programs to help Haitian migrants or Haitian people, to find data, to use it for a social purpose, or the robotics, or helping families to escape homelessness. Those projects are so important, so valuable, that you are doing an amazing job. Never hesitate of yourselves. Believe me, I used to hesitate of myself always. Throughout my life, I always said, like, I'm very insecure. I don't know if what I'm doing is right. So, but this past year, especially due to the fellowship, I realized that what I was doing was good. It has a space in this world. So never hesitate of yourselves. You are perfect, and the job that you are doing is amazing. So keep on doing it. Keep on doing it, and you will eventually find the support that you already have through Little Big Fund, for example. But there are many other doors that you can knock, and they will certainly open. So that would be like the final message, because basically because I am living it right now. So believe me, you are perfect.
What a beautiful way to close. Goosebumps all around. Thank you so much for kicking off this year with this story and all of the advice and guidance and wisdom that you've shared. I will be sure to share if your contacts with anyone that's interested in connecting with you. And we definitely, as Little Big Fund, look forward to staying in close touch, following your journey. We will be looking out for that documentary. I'll keep an eye out on my Netflix at some point down the road to definitely look at it for sure. And if this community can do anything to support your work and your movement, please do consider us as part of your network as well. Thank you once again, Jose, for joining us. And everyone else, thank you for being here. It's been such a pleasure to kick off this year with all of your wonderful faces after the short break. We'll see everyone in February for our next convening, and we'll send out emails in the next week with our next guest. Thank you, everyone. Gail, any final words as we close?
Just thank you so much, everyone. And Jose, just very inspirational. You're very kind, very generous. You have a big spirit, and I know that it's making a difference in the world. And I look forward to staying in touch and being involved in what you're doing, knowing about what you're doing.
Thank you very much, Gail and Abhinav, for the invitation, and everyone. Well, just have a very good day.
Thank you all. Have a wonderful one. We'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.